I'm titling this podcast as Early Warnings for Mitigating Climate Impacts on Education. The actual report from World Bank says the impact of climate change on education and what to do about it. Well, when you say climate change, a lot of people get, you know, uh, upset, or they begin to argue that climate change is not happening, this, that, and the other things. You want people to just perceive the risk and do something about it. I myself am always a bit skeptical about doing attribution, even though everything is now happening in a warm world, so everything has a contribution from climate change. So education, on the other hand, is much easier problem in terms of protecting it from everything, not just climate change. Poverty, gender issues, and climate, weather, extreme weather, and nutrition issues, and so on and so forth. So that's why I'm trying to make it focus more on what can we do about it in terms of providing early warnings. Of course, there are many other issues, including providing safe buildings and so on, as we'll see in a minute. So the summary of the report is that education can be the key to ending poverty in a livable planet, but governments must act now to protect it. Climate change is increasing the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events such as cyclones, floods, droughts, heat waves, and wildfires. As we know, these extreme weather events are in turn disrupting schooling, precipitating learning losses, dropouts, and long-term impacts. So you can become trapped into a vicious circle where you are poor, weather makes you, handicapped in terms of getting a good education or complete education, and then you get stuck in poverty. Even if the most dramatic climate mitigation strategies were implemented, extreme weather events will continue to have detrimental impacts on education outcomes. Climate change is causing massive school closures. A 10-year-old in 2024 will experience twice as many wildfires and tropical cyclones, 3 times more river floods, 4 times more crop failures, and 5 times more droughts over her lifetime in a 3 degrees C warming pathway than a 10-year-old in 1970. Complicated calculation. Basically, if you are going to go to 3 degrees C, this report, which is a few years old, says where will we be by 2024? Well, as it turned out, I'm recording this in mid-October 2024. 23-24 have been supremely warm because of the El Nino that happened last year, massive El Nino that superposed on global warming, maybe some submarine volcano, underwater volcano that went off in the Pacific also added some water vapor, and so on and so forth. Wildfires added a lot of greenhouse gases, etc. But does that mean this is what 3 degrees C warming will look like? Well, we have to be careful about those, because we are not very good at saying locally what will happen with some level of global warming, right? So that's a separate issue, but it matters in early warnings, because early warnings have to be hyperlocal and accurate at some level to be able to make decisions, right? So over the past 20 years, schools were closed in around 75% or more of the extreme weather events that impacted 5 million people or more. These closures were often prolonged due to infrastructure vulnerability and the use of school infrastructure for emergency sheltering. Okay, rigorous evidence from COVID-19 shows that on average, a day of school closure is a day of learning lost, right? Let me read some more of the text. At the same time, rising temperatures are also inhibiting learning. A school day under extreme heat is a day in which some learning is lost, while the size of the impact remains uncertain, and highly context-specific temperatures that are very high or deviate significantly from local trends do precipitate learning losses. Okay, this would mean, so just jumping ahead, average student would lose between 0.66 and 1.5 years of learning due to rising temperatures in Brazil. Together, these effects will lead to significant learning losses, which will turn into significant income losses, lower productivity, greater inequality, and possibly greater social unrest. So, despite these catastrophic consequences, education remains overlooked in the climate policy agenda. NDC's policies to deal with adaptation and so on. Education, in terms of protecting it against climate, making it weather ready, climate resilient, is not talked about much. Education made up less than 1.3% of climate related official development assistance in 2020 and mentioned in less than 1 in 3 nationally determined contribution plans. This paper lays out 4 concrete ways in which governments can protect education systems from climate change so that their positive impacts on economic development, poverty alleviation, and social cohesion can be sustained and boosted. These are education management for resilience, school infrastructure for resilience, ensuring learning continuity in the face of climate shocks, and leveraging students and teachers as change agents. So, the paper presents an actionable agenda for each of these with operational examples. So, I won't read all the case studies, but the report is very nice in going and bringing and highlighting the examples of where community action, government action, and so on worked to protect education against climate extreme events and make them more resilient. I'll read off 1 or 2. Okay, so climate change is threatening education outcomes. That's kind of the headline of this chapter. The 2019 cyclone demolished houses. Even our dishes were broken, and both our hospital and school were damaged. Our classroom was destroyed, and at the spot where I used to study under the mango trees, the books, pictures, and notebooks got really wet when it rained, says Candida, 12-year-old student in Mozambique, right? Developing country. Just jumping ahead, I'm going to be very brief about this as usual. Please go and follow up on the report for details. Climate change erodes education outcomes through both direct and indirect impacts. So, nice infographic here. Direct impacts, of course, through extreme heat, cyclones, floods, landslides, wildfires, and droughts, impacting the access to quality service delivery at schools, destruction and or temporary closure of schools, learning environments not conducive to learning because of extreme heat, and so on. So, climate change erodes education outcomes. In terms of indirect impacts, you have air quality, for example, smoke from wildfires, food security, health, in terms of vector-borne diseases, conflict, migration, displacement, and economic shocks coming from climate impacts, disruption of education services due to displacement and conflict, diminished demand for schooling due to household coping management, reduced student readiness to learn due to health and nutrition shocks. So, long-term impacts, dropouts, learning losses, and obviously need for mitigation and adaptation to deal with all these, and that's where early warnings come in. Mitigating the impact, preparing for extreme events, recovering quickly, and so on, and building resilience all require early warnings, and then of course maybe decadal predictions and so on. Climate change is causing massive school closures. I have only one thing to say about Cyclone Idai. We were left with nothing. Our houses were all destroyed, the school too, and we didn't have classes because classrooms were full of water and the walls were damaged. Later, when the rain stopped, we continued to teach, but under the trees, says Celeste Jose Mucaise maybe, the primary school teacher in Mozambique again. World population affected by climate shocks in 1981 to 2020 as a 5-year moving average. It has ups and downs, but basically it has increased and reached, in millions now by 2020, over 77 million, and 23-24 have been bad as well. So, most countries experiencing more climate-related school closures every year, and the message is clear in terms of flood, storm, drought, etc. Poor countries do worse. So, Afghanistan remains high in, let's say, floods. So, dry places getting floods. This is a bad combination, right? Because the flooding becomes easier when the soil is hard and has dried up and desiccated and so on, and rain comes in heavy spells. Nicely distributed rain, the same amount would make really useful resource for agriculture, drinking water, recharging groundwater, and so on and so forth. So you can see that the developing and least developed and low income countries are all here with high levels of experienced climate related school closures every year over these years from 2005 to 2022 or so. Rising temperatures threaten children and their education. Education impacts of climate change are an economic time bomb. It just traps people into a poverty vicious cycle. It's just circle. Global incidence of extreme heat days greater than 30 degrees C in 2020. So obviously there is regional specific details in these things, because what is a heat wave in the tropics is not the same as what is a heat wave in mid latitudes, for example, if you go up here. So extreme heat days greater than 30 degrees, you have number of days here. The red ones are greater than 180 degrees in 2020 alone. So you can see that again Brazil is a red hotspot. Obviously Sahara and Middle East and parts of India and parts of Southeast Asia here, and so on and so forth. Okay, so again developing and least developed countries fall in this category of experiencing extreme heat, and of course following up impacts on cascades into education and so on, health. Climate change impacts on health and fragility further erode education outcomes. Because of climate change, now we have a crisis of water, and then a crisis of land, and then we have terrorist groups again, which has developed into this civil war we are witnessing now in Mali. And then because of this insecurity, there is no education, there is no security, and there is no development. This is from Huayame Hakmi, from Mali, a Malian PhD student in Morocco. So you can imagine this is climate change is created, let's say, by the rich countries. Of course, poor countries may be involved in terms of deforestation, etc. But nonetheless, the impacts are falling on the vulnerable and the poor. Climate change, air pollution, and education. There is a box here with some details. Climate change can increase air pollutants through changes in photochemical reactions, ventilation and dilution and removal processes such as precipitation. So if you shift precipitation, you may increase washout or you may decrease it. Climate change is likely to increase global air pollution and associated mortality. Projections have shown that 14% of the overall increase in ozone mortality from 2000 to 2100, estimated in a high emission scenario, RCP 8.5, you can look it up elsewhere on my channel, will be attributed to climate change. Okay, so PM 2.5, the particulate matter 2.5, which you cannot even see, gets into your lungs, brain, blood, and causes all sorts of problems. Nitrous oxide, this is from Brazil, but the story is the same in China or India or Sahara and so on and so forth. So obviously these things affect kids. Can you play outside when it's highly polluted? Well, they do, but then what are the impacts? Vulnerable communities who have contributed the least to climate change will be the most affected. Unfortunately, we are the ones who can no longer mitigate. We have to adapt, says Lashanti Jup, an education activist in Bahamas. This is from Kea Lamba, youth activist in the UK. We always say climate change is a global issue, but actually it looks completely different in different cities and countries, and so children are experiencing it differently, and the solutions have to be also local. Nobody lives in global mean temperatures or global mean sea level. All global warming is local. Always remember that. What should policymakers do? Adapt education systems for greater resilience through 4 steps. The approach advocated here to adapt education system to climate change. Education management for resilience. So you are trying to protect education outcomes by allocating funding for boosting resilience overall. And then splitting it into students and teachers as change agents for resilience after managing education for resilience, and ensuring learning continuity for resilience, school infrastructure for resilience. So this is all well beyond early warnings, which is what I'm going to mention, and the report does as well. So planning for adaptation and risk management with data, early warnings, establish early warning systems. This is very critical and this is doable. Strengthen school level management in response to early warnings as well. Involve students and teachers in risk management, train them in responding to early warnings, equip teachers with training and tools, support students and teachers after climate shocks, so how to recover quickly from extreme events. Sorry about that. And similarly, there are other details in terms of ensuring compliance with building codes, structural adjustments to minimize damage, risk-informed location. So each region, each meter of the world eventually has to be given a risk profile for the next few days, few hours, a season, few years, and a decade to manage resilience, right? Some examples of early warning system for schools: mobile app for disaster response in Indonesia. INARISK is a platform that summarizes, so this is INARISK, summarizes results of local level disaster risk following hazard assessments conducted by the local government. It has a mobile app that provides information about risks and guidance on how to take anticipatory action during a disaster, which again comes in through early warnings. Okay, so a really good example in a developing world. So schools receive alerts through different channels, and evacuation procedures are often practiced during drills. So they are trained to respond quickly when the warning happens, and we know from places like the tornado belt in the US that these really save lives. Quick action upon receiving warning, right? Sample strategies to combat classroom extreme heat, again from Indonesia, Kenya, and Taiwan. Low tech in terms of painting rooftops white to reduce the impact inside. Tree planting, obviously longer term resilience, which also provides shade, increases soil moisture soil moisture persistence, and so on and so forth, and can sequester additional carbon if we protect them. As a high-tech solution, air conditioning in schools in Taiwan, which is a rich country, but it's necessary. But now also you have to remember HFCs are powerful greenhouse agents, so we have to phase out the coolants, refrigerants as well. Okay. Sample innovative design for temperature control. Gando Primary School in Burkina Faso. The Gando Primary School was designed by Francis Kering within the parameters set by cost, climate, resource availability, and construction feasibility. Clay was used for construction, material is abundant, avoid overheating. They used corrugated metal roof. The design pulls the roof of the primary school away from learning space of the interior. Dry stack brick ceiling is introduced in between, allowing for maximum ventilation. Cool air is pulled in from the interior windows, while hot air is released out through perforations in the clay roof. Amazing design. This also significantly reduces the ecological footprint of the school by alleviating the need for air conditioning. Obviously, Burkina Faso is not a rich country, so they are doing fantastically well in using adaptations in school buildings. The policy strategies to increase resilience of education system to climate stressors. Learning continuity in Bangladesh, online learning program, e-learning. Catch-up programs in Liberia, give a second chance. The Luminos Fund Second Chance program is a remedial learning program for Liberian out-of-school children aged 8 to 14. Socio-emotional programs in Mozambique, increasing teacher capacity to provide psychosocial support. You can only help them more by providing them early warnings of extreme events and heat waves, floods, droughts, wildfires, whatever. Example of teacher and student training program on on disaster resilience, disaster risk reduction through school training in Kyrgyz Republic. Nice graphic with unreadable text, which you can go and read from the report. The comprehensive school safety framework program in Kyrgyz Republic is training students and teachers on safe behaviors during an emergency, including floods, landslides, and earthquakes. So it's important to train kids and teachers, and of course the people around, to respond to early warnings. Education can be the key to ending poverty in a livable planet, but governments must act now to protect education from climate change. We can't be oblivious to the fact that we are facing a global crisis. At some point, we're going to have to take a back step and acknowledge we are in a crisis and we need to address it accordingly. This is from Boitumelo Molet, youth activist in South Africa. Finally, the bidirectional relationship between climate and education. Climate change can help mitigate education can help mitigate climate change, produce ambassadors or action to go out of school, campus, and bring implementation of mitigation, adaptation action. So here you have spurring mitigation and adaptation. Here you have need for adaptation and mitigation. Education propels climate action. Climate change threatens education outcomes. So you need innovation, skills, mindset and behaviors all can be part of the education. And of course you need to protect against learning losses, dropouts, and make the system resilient against long-term impact. Always think about chronic changes in temperatures, precipitation, humidity, and so on, and acute stressors, extreme events acting on top of them. So the background resilience against long-term impacts has to be done through early warnings plus some decadal predictions that are again hyperlocal, reliable, usable, and all those good things. Okay, so very nice podcast, and very, very important to protect education. We don't even have to worry about whether it's because of climate change. We just need to watch what's happening, provide early warnings, and protect education, kids, women, teachers, community, and so on. Okay, see you in the next topic.